Hello everyone and welcome back to another average review. And boy, are we reviewing a controversial figure today. The ever-elusive Hasbro Marvel Legends Maximum Series Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. Now, starting off with the packaging, and I do gotta give this figure praise for the actual box, because it looks amazing. I do like the Maximum Series logo, it looks very good. On the side, we see digital renderings of the figure, along with a bunch of comic panels colored all red in the background to fit with Spidey's color scheme, and another digital render on the back with more of these, comic panels behind Spider-Man, but colored a dark red so that Spider-Man does pop with his much more bright colors. I also like the use of actual shadowing on the box to give the image a bit of depth, along with Spider-Man actually being in front of the Maximum logo, which I do think is pretty cool. On the side, same deal, another digital render of Spidey with some comic panels in the back. So yeah, I gotta say, the box for Maximum Spidey is pretty dang cool. But what really matters is the figure inside. So let's take a look and see exactly what $50 will get you for a Spider-Man figure. Alright, moving on to the sculpting and paintwork, and ignoring everything related to accessories, articulation, price point, I do like how this guy looks. He isn't a perfect Todd McFarlane Spidey likeness, but I still feel like he's a good, 90s Spider-Man. He's got the super angular eyes, the ridiculous amount of webs across, his mask and, the entirety of his body. And that spider logo is especially McFarlane-esque, which I do think is pretty cool looking. Now, as, fitting for the Maximum line, which is supposed to be super deluxe figures, this Spider-Man has a completely 100% new body mold, unlike Cough Cough Maximum Hulk. And it does look pretty dang good. I mean, this is as good, if not maybe better, than Renew Your Vows as a general Spider-Man body. And as you'll see in the figure comparisons, he's a bit shorter, which is more accurate to Spidey's height in the comics. There's a lot of fabric tugs and musculature poking through, but he still strikes a line between lean and bulky, which is perfect for Spider-Man, especially in the 1990s. Now, moving from the sculpting to the paintwork, as I said, I like the spider logo on the chest and the super, just massive amount of webs throughout all the red parts of the suit. They look really, really good. Taking a look on the back, and I really like the back spider. But I have a problem. It extends onto the butterfly joints, so when you bend them forward, it looks really weird, and I don't really like that. I feel like they should have just ended it where, the butterfly joints start and the actual back of the figure ends. Other than that, I love how this figure looks. So much detailing in the web lines, and I haven't spotted many paint errors. One of the eyes on the actual mask does feel a little off, and I do see a bit of a paint smudge on this butterfly joint, but I mean, other than that, this looks really good in terms of the paint work, which is to be expected for an ultra deluxe figure like this, but I mean, still, it's nice to see how good it looks. I will say, I do kind of wish they picked a brighter blue. This does match pretty well with Renew Your Vows and certainly fits the darker 90s era, but I don't know, I feel like something closer to the, 77 movie Spider-Man would have looked a bit better. It's still a fairly dark blue, but it's much brighter and more befitting of Spider-Man. But hey, in terms of the looks department, this is one of the best Spider-Men in just any mass-market toy line. Even if the back spider is a little awkward, and the head sculpt isn't a perfect Todd McFarlane Spidey head sculpt, I still like how this guy looks. But the real question is, how does this guy pose in terms of his articulation? Starting with the head articulation, and Spidey actually has two joints for looking up and down, which is obviously the standard, disc hinge on a ball joint, at the base of the skull, but he's also got a ball joint at the base of the neck, which lets him look up this far, which is pretty dang good, look down this far, which is also good, spin his head around at both the neck and at, well, the base of the neck, and also actually get tilt side to side, which you'd usually need a dumbbell joint to get, which does actually usually mean, for Marvel Legends at least, that the articulation in the rest of the neck wouldn't be as good, but Maximum Spidey decided to circumvent this with the ball joint in the neck, which I do think is pretty dang clever. But moving down to the arms, and he does have butterfly joints, which can bend forward this far, bend backwards this far, and he's also got shoulders that can spin around and hinge up above 90 degrees, which is pretty dang good to see. He's also, of course, got bicep swivel, which lets you turn his arms all the way around, along with double jointed elbows, which do get a nearly perfect bend, which I do want to see on figures like this, especially when they're so expensive. Now, moving down the arm, and he's actually got a swivel at the forearm, but this is more so for one of his accessories and less for articulation, especially since he's already got a standard Marvel Legends wrist that can spin around and hinge up or down. Moving to the torso articulation, and like Renew Your Vows Spidey, Maximum Spidey has a waist crunch and a diaphragm joint, which lets him bend forward this far, which is pretty dang good, and arch back this far, which does leave the tiniest bit to be desired, but in combination with his neck articulation, you can get him into some pretty good arched poses. He at the diaphragm joint, he's of course also got swivel all the way around, but of course this does break up the red on his torso, and tilt side to side. Moving down to the leg articulation, and he's actually got drop-down hips, which in combination with his standard Marvel Legends ball-jointed hips gets him a pretty dang good kick forward, above 90 degrees. Unfortunately, his split does leave a fair bit to be desired, but it's not that bad. He's of course got the standard Marvel Legends thigh cut, which gets you rotation all the way around, along with double jointed knees with, once again, a near perfect bend, which I do want to see for acrobatic characters like Spidey, along with boot cut rotation, Marvel Legends ankles that can hinge forwards, backwards, and pivot side to side, and finally, Marvel Legends toe articulation, which is pretty dang important for a superposable Spidey like this. So overall, I am pretty satisfied with Maximum Spidey's articulation, but for a figure this expensive, I do want a better split in the legs, along with a better arch back, and that would be preferable. But hey, sculpting, paintwork, and articulation ain't everything. Let's see how well this Spider-Man mixes with other Spider-Man related figures, and also some Marvel vs. Capcom ones, since Maximum Spidey is clearly meant to be a stand-in for a Marvel vs. Capcom Spider-Man, which we'll see in the accessories portion. Alright, moving on to the figure comparisons, and I of course have to start out with the standard male and female comparisons, Renew Your Vows Spider-Man and Spinneret. I'd also like to quickly try some head swaps with some of these Spider-Men, since I feel like it'd be interesting to get different looks for the Maximum Spidey. Unfortunately, I don't think this head swap works very well. The Maximum head looks way too small on Renew Your Vows, and the Renew Your Vows head looks way too small on Maximum Spidey, which is a bit disappointing since this is a pretty dang good Mark Bagley Spider-Man head. Although the Pizza Spidey head does look pretty similar, and I'd assume it's smaller, but I don't know since, unfortunately, I don't have that figure. But hey, let's rush through some other important Marvel Legends Spideys to do some comparisons. Starting off with, of course, the first appearance Spidey, who's also very similar size to this Maximum, so I feel like this head swap has a more likely chance of working out. Unfortunately, I feel like the neck on Maximum is too thin for the Amazing Fantasy head, and the Maximum head sits a bit too low on the Amazing Fantasy body. But hey, it definitely looks better than the Renew Your Vows swap. Another similarly sized Spidey is the cinematic No Way Home Final Swingsuit Spidey. Unfortunately, the red on the Final Swing Spidey is a fair bit brighter than on the Maximum Spidey, but I still feel like in terms of size and proportions, this is probably the best swap we've done so far. And hey, it's an interesting look on if the No Way Home Final Swing suit, and also the brand new Day suit since they're exactly the same, had a more 90s inspired mask like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. But hey, for one of the previous definitive Marvel Legends Spideys, we have the classic retro-carded Spidey. I will say, the Maximum head looks a lot better on the retro-carded Spidey than it does on the Renew Your Vows body, which is pretty cool to see, even if the colors on both of them don't exactly match. Although, I would say it's less noticeable than it is with the Final Swingsuit Spidey. But hey, to cap out the classic red and blue Spidey comparisons, we have the original 6-inch scale McFarlane-style Spider-Man, the figure that's also considered by many to be the first true Marvel Legends figure, the Toy Biz Spider-Man Classics Red and Blue Spidey. It's pretty dang cool to see over 20 years of action figure evolution just by comparing these two. But hey, for some Spider-Man with very different suits from the classic red and blue, we have Peter Parker in his symbiote costume from the Spider-Man 2 game, and Miles Morales from his own game. But hey, speaking of video games, we should bring in a couple of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 figures, since that's definitely what this Maximum Spidey is meant to fit in with, since he's a 90s Spidey that has a couple Marvel vs. Capcom inspired accessories, which we'll get to later. Anyways, for another Maximum series figure that is very clearly meant to be a Marvel vs. Capcom figure, though, we have the Maximum Hulk with his Professor Hulk head to match the version from the classic fighting game. For some of the actual Marvel vs. Capcom Gamerverse figures, though, we have Wolverine and Silver Samurai from their respective 2-pack. But we also have the Captain America and, fitting for Spider-Man, Venom 2-pack, and these two go especially great with Spider-Man. Mainly because they all share elements of Captain America's color scheme. Spidey has red and blue, and the Marvel vs. Capcom version of Venom sports blue and white. But I do wish this Spider-Man had a much brighter blue like this Cap and Venom, so that it would have matched very well. And hey, I think that would have just looked plain good since, you know, it's Spider-Man. It makes sense if he has super bright colors. Venom is a great segue into other Spider-Man villains, starting with, another Venom from one of the Marvel video games, specifically the Spider-Man 2 Venom. And it's crazy to think that these two have a difference in price of about $10, and look at the difference. Pretty dang crazy. But hey, for some other villains, we have fellow symbiote Carnage, Cletus Cassidy, along with the Shocker, because as we know from Spider-Man the Animated Series, the Shocker and symbiotes always mix well. But hey, symbiotes can change parts of their form, so For some other villains that can do similar things, we have the Chameleon, although he can only change his face, from Hasbro, and the Toy Biz Spider-Man Classics version of Sandman. Sandman also mixes well with symbiotes like Shocker, as proven by Spider-Man 3. For some larger-than-life characters, though, we have the retro-carded Rhino, and also the retro-carded Kingpin. I know he's massive and super durable, but I honestly don't know how Kingpin survives so many punches from characters like Spider-Man, if I'm being frank with you. Speaking of being frank with you, we have Frank Castle, the Punisher. I actually have the Gamerverse Punisher and Nick Fury Sr. 2-pack on pre-order, so hopefully it should arrive around Tuesday. And believe me, you'll definitely be seeing a video on that 2-pack when it arrives. But for two villains that were responsible for some of Spidey's most iconic moments, we have the Toy Biz Spider-Man Classics Kraven the Hunter and the Hasbro Marvel Legends Dr. Octopus. With Kraven, it's obviously Kraven's Last Hunt, but for Doc Ock, I'll be honest, there's too many iconic moments involving him to even begin to list. But I feel like there's one Spidey villain I haven't brought out yet that's fairly easily more iconic than both of these two. And that is, of course, the Green Goblin. Of course, we have to start out with the old Toy Biz Marvel Legends Green Goblin, since for many, it's the definitive version of the character in action figure form, due to the mix of realism and also comic accuracy. And I do think the duller colors do kind of work with the darker blue of this Spider-Man. But one that leads even harder into the realism and also creepiness is the Hasbro Marvel Legends Sandman Wave version. And I actually really like how this goblin looks with this Spidey. Similar to the Toy Biz version, he's got a darker color scheme, but there's also a lot more of a dark, edgy look to him. That certainly fits with, the edgy 90s Todd McFarlane Spidey. But if you're more a fan of pure, campy comic book goodness, then you can't go wrong with the retro-carded Green Goblin. And despite him having a much brighter color scheme than the last two, and even Spider-Man, since he's got a pretty dark blue, I do really like how this Green Goblin looks with Spidey. But it's hard to bring up the Green Goblin without bringing out Gwen Stacy. This version is also from the first series of the Retro card line, like the Retro Spidey and Green Goblin. But for the other member of the Parker family with a willpower comparable to Peter, we have Aunt May from the VHS 2-pack with Dr. Octopus. I was really lucky to get this Aunt May loose on her own at a convention a while ago, since so far, this is the only Marvel Legends Aunt May. Though it would be kinda neat to see that change and, if the Marvel Legends team decided to give us a comic version of Aunt May, along with maybe some other characters in Peter Parker's civilian life. But hey, speaking of Spider-Man's civilian life, we have to take out the best character in the entire Spider-Man mythos, J. Jonah Jameson. Both the one from the Raimi trilogy by Toy Biz and No Way Home by Hasbro. Both, of course, played by the remarkable J.K. Simmons. But, as is tradition, here's the Marvel Legends Maximum Spider-Man with Hitmonkey and Goliath. Alright, now that we're done with the figure comparisons, we can finally move on to the accessories. But I will say, despite there being plenty of accessories I love and think are super cool inclusions, I also feel like in some ways, the accessories are the first weak point of this figure. But hey, starting off with the alternate hands, Spidey of course comes pre-packed with a pair of fists, a pair of web-shooting thwippy hands. I believe these are also new web-shooting hand pieces, so that's pretty cool. And of course, a pair of open wall crawler hands. Now, in my opinion, and in many others' opinions, these are the bare essentials for Spider-Man hands. But luckily, Maximum Spidey, being a deluxe figure, comes with a couple more. He's also got a pair of accessory holding hands, which are pretty useful for two of his accessories, which we'll get to later on. And finally, a pair of web shooting hands with the webs actually coming out of them. Now, I really do like this pair of alternate hands, and I think it's pretty cool. But I feel like there's also a bit of a mistake with making these alternate hands, rather than them being alternate forearms with the webs coming out. In terms of accuracy, I mean, I'm pretty sure Spider-Man's web shooters actually, like, sort of shoot out of, like, the tips of his forearms and at, like, the base of his hand. So that would have still been accurate. And it also probably would have cost less to produce, since with these, they have to make a new hand mold, a new web mold, and then the joint for the hand. But with swappable forearms, they could have just made the forearm, and then the web effect. And then that could have gone to maybe making extra web effects for those forearms. You know, that small bit of money they saved. You know, ones that stretch out longer than this. Bit of a nitpick, but I don't know. I feel like that's something they should have maybe done. But hey, there is a purpose for the swappable forearms. And that's for these ungloved forearms. Now, there's no hinge or swivel at the wrists, there's only swivel at the forearms, but these are pretty cool, you know, alternate forearms, since, I mean, you can see Spidey's web shooters under his costume, and I do feel like that's kind of cool. But again, I do have another nitpick. I feel like they could have easily separated the hands and the forearms. You know, so that the hands could actually, you know, hinge and be swapped with maybe some of the gloved Spidey hands. So that you can maybe have a Spidey with, you know, just exposed web shooters. I'm sure plenty of people would like to have that option. Granted, it's not something that's 100% for me, but like I said, more options is better, especially for a deluxe figure like this. But overall, besides those two nitpicks, I do feel like the Marvel Legends team did do good with the alternate hands. With a lot of the other accessories, though, there are a couple problems. Now, one of the alternate heads is an unmasked Peter Parker head that quote-unquote goes well with these ungloved hands. It does make for an interesting suiting up look, but I'm sure, as you've heard time and time again, a lot of people hate this Peter Parker head sculpt. Now, I'll say, it actually doesn't look as bad in person as it does in photos or videos, but it still looks bad. I think there's just like 2 or maybe 3 things that make this head sculpt look off. I feel like they overdid the paint on the lips, so it kind of looks like he's wearing lipstick. I feel like the sort of shadows or bagginess under his eyes make him look a bit weird, and the shade of brown for his eyes just kind of looks a bit off to me. Either that or it's just all these 3 things combined that look weird, and individually, they'd probably look fine. I don't know, that's just me guessing as to why the head sculpt looks off. Now, one head that I feel like looks better, but I still have problems with, is the sort of, I guess, shocked or kinda angry head sculpt, where we have one of the Spider-Man lenses with more black around it. Now, I don't think this is actually meant to be a reference to McFarlane's Spider-Man, but rather another Spider-Man artist, Humberto Ramos, who would draw a similar thing with Spider-Man's mask, where there's one smaller white in the lenses and one that's a lot bigger to sort of, show shock or confusement. But I feel like the Maximum Spidey just doesn't go far enough with how much black is around the eye. They should have either stuck harder to the Humberto Ramos style head, or alternatively, give the same amount of, black around the lenses to both eyes, so he'd just look a bit more angrier or determined. In fact, that'd probably look a bit closer to McFarlane's art style. But I will say, there is another accessory that I really like that goes pretty well with this head sculpt, and it's this spider sense effect that goes right over his head. This will probably work with other Spider-Men too, although that does depend on how big their head is. But still, I have no complaints with this accessory. It looks really good. And you could probably use it with plenty of other Spider-Man figures. But we're not done yet, because this Spidey does have some web effects. I'll actually start out with my favorite, which is this web shield. It looks really good, and is a cool accessory that's actually, straight out of the comics. Similar to the Captain America shield, it's got this, clip that snaps onto Spidey's wrists, so you don't need to use the accessory holding hands to, just hold it by one of the peg holes on the inside. So yeah, this is a pretty, cool accessory. It's even semi-transparent, which definitely sells the web look. Now, for an accessory that could have been really cool, but Hasbro kind of dropped the ball on, we have these web lines that Spider-Man holds in his accessory holding hands. Now, don't get me wrong, the sculpting on these is great. They pretty much perfectly capture McFarlane's, specific way of drawing webbing that he was pretty much the first to do. Spaghetti webbing, as a lot of people call it. But the problem is, they don't have a wire or anything in them, so they just kind of flop around, and yeah, that isn't really that great. If these had a wire, they would be amazing. The posable web line that came with the Mezco Homecoming Spider-Man is actually a perfect example of this. It manages to look pretty similar to McFarlane's spaghetti-style webbing, while still being fully posable. I get that Mezco figures are, far more high quality than most Marvel Legends and also far more expensive. But come on, if McFarlane can add wires to half of their DC Multiverse capes, at least in their new releases, then Marvel Legends can add, 1 or 2 wires to one single Spider-Man figure. Now, for the last accessory that we'll be talking about, we have one that's kinda cool and also kinda what's going on here. The translucent stand, and also 2 webbing effects for it. This one is more net-like, and I really do like it. It looks super good. It's a classic Spider-Man, web net, and I'm pretty sure it's a reference to a move from one of the Marvel vs. Capcom games. So, yeah, that definitely adds to this feeling like a Marvel vs. Capcom Spidey figure. But the other web effect is this one. We all know what this looks like, so let's just move on. Now, I'd say the first area where this figure really faults is the accessories. Mind you, I do like a lot of them. I like the spider sense effect, the alternate hands, and also the 2 alternate forearms. Those are pretty dang cool. I also like the web shield and web net effect. I think they're pretty neat, but everywhere else is kinda either mediocre or just kinda bad. The alternate, more expressive, sorta Humberto Ramos style head honestly leaves a lot to be desired. It's not exaggerated enough to be cartoonish, but also it's not serious enough to be, a super serious head sculpt. I feel like it needs to go go more to either direction, make both of the eyes squinted, or exaggerate the squint on the eye that's squinted. There's also the web lines that I feel like should have definitely been wired in some way, or just posable. And of course, the unmasked head is really, really bad. Like, let's be honest here. But the second area where this figure falters, and the one that more people talk about, is the price. Maximum Spidey retails for about $50. About double the price of the average Marvel Legends, running at $25. Let's be honest here. That pricing is kinda garbage. Let's take a look at some other similarly priced, figures or 2-packs. For around the same price, $50 to $55, you can get the Iron Man and Mandarin 2-pack, which comes with 2 figures that have, in my opinion, more worthwhile and useful accessories, even though there's less accessories than Maximum Spidey. Now, I made the comparison earlier, but I should bring it up again. The Deluxe Spider-Man 2 Venom. Way less accessories, only 2 alternate hands, an alternate head, and some tentacle effect along with a saliva effect for one of the alternate heads. But all of those accessories are super useful, and the figure is also massive with great articulation for only $10 more. And that figure is nearly double the size of a Marvel Legends. So yeah, I think both Maximum Spidey and Maximum Hulk should have been, at the very least, $10 less than what they actually retailed for. Maximum Hulk should have been maybe $50, and Spidey should have been $40. I'd still be complaining about my problems with the accessories, but they'd be a bit less of a problem considering you're spending less money on them. I've said most of my thoughts in the pricing section, but for my final thoughts on Maximum Spidey, I'm conflicted. I love the sculpting, articulation, paintwork, and of course, compatibility with other figures in the Marvel Legends line, mainly, of course, fellow Spidey figures. But I feel like even though the alternate hand selection is good, the accessories as a whole kind of falter. And of course, there's the matter of price. In my opinion, Maximum Spider-Man is the action figure epitome of high highs and low lows. He has some of the greatest articulation out of the entire Marvel Legends line. I mean, seriously, it's pretty dang easy to achieve some of the anatomically impossible Todd McFarlane poses if you just, try a bit hard. And the complex paintwork is really, really good looking. Some people have problems with, the accuracy to Todd McFarlane's art in terms of the head sculpt, but personally, I think it's just fine. But the problems are the epitome of the bad within the Marvel Legends line. He's overpriced, and a fair bit of his accessories are kinda useless. So even though this guy is probably, in terms of objectively, one of the best Spider-Men in the Marvel Legends line, even just ignoring the price, I'm still gonna give the Marvel Legends Maximum Spider-Man a 6 out of 10. I don't hate this figure as a whole, but I do have a lot of problems with it. Still, I have had fun with this figure. And even though I have a boatload of problems with it, I still am glad I have it. Since, hey, at the very least, I didn't have to buy it for a super increased price on the secondary market. I just brought it for the retail price, which, still kind of stings a bit. Either way, if you made it this far into the video, tell me your thoughts on Maximum Spidey. I'm sure a lot of people have very, very different opinions on this figure. So hey, if you want to start a bit of a conversation in the comments, feel free to do so. I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on this figure. Either way though, if you've made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you very much for watching, and second of all, have a great day, 'cause you deserve it.